Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel where today we are doing a full review of The Good Luck Girls by Charlotte Nicole Davis. This is the first book in a series. Unknown how many books there are going to be. But in The Good Luck Girls, this is a YA fantasy dystopian. I'm not really sure how to describe it because it is an alternate world, which has a very Western feel to it. And in this particular world, there is a group of people who are more or less slaves, and then of course the landowners. But Aster is one of those people that is born into the group that is more or less slaves, and she was sold to a welcome house when she was young, which is exactly what it sounds like. So basically, at welcome houses, girls are sold there, and from the time that they are sold until they are 16, they are servants there, and then at 16, they are prostitutes, and that's what they are expected to do from the age of 16 until 40 when they are kicked out. So Aster is about 17 years old, so she has been working as a prostitute for the last year. Her younger sister was sold with her and is now having her good luck night, basically, and that's where her virginity is sold. And Clementine, her sister, freaks out and kills a man, and so now Aster has taken it on herself to figure out how to escape so that they, aren't killed themselves. And so Aster, Clementine, and three other girls do escape the welcome house, and this is their story as they try to keep ahead of the people who are after them and make it to a different country that offers freedom. So, first, let's talk about world building. Now, I said it was Western-esque, and I do stand by that, but the world building itself was pretty shallow. So it did seem to rely mostly on our assumptions about what Western towns kind of looked like and felt like. It was actually kind of generic. I didn't really feel like there was a whole lot special about the towns themselves. There was like not magic system, but like there were magical things in this world, and that did make it unique. But there was no explanation of it. There was like no how or why or anything like that. Just like, oh no, there's three different kinds of ghosts, and like we're not told why people become ghosts. Just there are ghosts. And so I did really feel that the world building was lacking, and I do think to some extent it hurt the story a bit. Like I had so many questions that never got answered. So next, let's talk about the plot. The basic outline of this is very solid. I do think that the problems were in the execution. So things felt a little bit easy, a little bit convenient, and really stretched my suspension of disbelief, which is saying something because I read a lot of romance and I read a lot of superhero comics, and so I am excellent at suspending disbelief. But there were times where I just got drawn out of these scenes because I was sitting there going like, okay, so they laid a trap so that they could lift a full-grown man who's probably about 200 pounds based off of how tall they're saying he is, and like the rope is going to snare his legs and they're going to lift him up in the tree so that his head is dangling above the ground. And I'm like, there are three 15 to 16-year-old girls who are pulling on that rope. And yeah, they were servant girls before that, but some of them were prostitutes. Like, do they really have that upper body strength? And so I was like, I was sitting here analyzing that kind of stuff, and it happened multiple times throughout this book. And so, like, it didn't really quite feel real to me. And that, of course, also led into, I didn't really feel like I didn't feel any of the stakes. So, like, there were moments where it was like I was supposed to be tense or anxious or like, how were they going to get through this? And I'm like, they'll be fine. Which is not what you want the reader to do, right? Like, I felt no tension and no anxiety through this book. Even when there was a moment where they're like, um, there was a really big moment where they're just like, we lost the money that we need for this thing. And I was sitting there going, it'll be fine. You'll either find the money or it won't matter. I never ever considered the possibility that they would still need the money and they wouldn't have it and it would actually negatively impact them. I never thought of that as a possibility. So that's like not good, right? Like you want your readers to feel some amount of tension. And so it's like with the how the plot was written, it just there were no stakes to it. Um so I did not love that. The other part is like how the dust jacket kind of words it makes it's a little bit more ambiguous. So I thought it was going to be like more about these girls going on this journey and like trying to stay a step ahead and learning what they're like really made of, but it's going to be a lot of character development, a lot of relationship development, and like they're going to form these really cool bonds. That's not what this is. It is very much about our main character of Aster, and she is figuring out who she is without the confines of this brothel that she was part of and without that structure. And so it's like, who is she? What is she capable of? What is she willing to do? And how does she want to fight against this incredibly oppressive system? And I do think that that's a solid plot. It's just not like what I expected. And I do want to make sure that I point that out, that that's really what this is about, because it was definitely not like these girls going on a journey and like becoming a very solid group, right? Um, so yeah, there was, like I said, the plot itself was solid. I just think that the execution could have used some work. Next, let's talk about the characters. So Aster is our main character, and she probably is arguably the most well developed. However, I still think she had some issues. So like I didn't always understand why she was making the decisions she was making, even though she has an inner monologue that is it's a lot. There's a lot of stuff going on, which makes sense. She's like trying to work out, again, she's trying to work out who she is and how she feels about things. So it makes sense that she would have a pretty intense inner monologue. But even still, she didn't always, like, I didn't always understand her reasonings for doing things. And so when I got to the end, I really thought, okay, I like her, but I don't feel like I know her all that well. And that might be intentional, as like she is changing and she doesn't maybe know herself as well as she would like to, but it's still I didn't love that part. The other one that might be the most well developed is Violet, who's another one of the girls in this group. She is definitely my favorite. But essentially we got her backstory, and her backstory and her explanations for why she's doing the things she's doing is actually tight enough that I really understood her character very well. I thought those scenes were well written and they were fairly concise. It was not like rambling or so I just thought it was very, very nicely done. I really, really liked Violet, and she is also just so prickly, so grumpy about everything. She is our pessimist realist kind of person, and I really liked her, and I do think she was well done. But honestly, all the other characters are fairly underdeveloped. They're kind of they're pigeonholed at the beginning, like Tansy is the medic and Malo's the fighter, and Clementine is like, the eternal optimist and everything. And honestly, they never, even though we find out more about each of these characters, they never really break free of that mold. And I didn't feel like I knew much about them at all. And so I do think that the characters were also lacking. They had potential, but for them, apart from Violet, I do think that they were lacking. So next, let's talk about the pacing and the writing style. So the writing style is pretty straightforward. It is mostly pretty well easy to understand. There is a lot of inner monologue, like I mentioned. There's a decent amount of description, like that I noticed, but I didn't think that the description was always great. Like I still couldn't always picture it, but I didn't find it to be particularly like dialogue heavy or anything like that. It is more action and inner monologue. So there you go. The pacing itself was a little bit all over the place. It always stayed within like the realm of being okay. So like, there's a variety of pacings that we would generally think are okay, and like the average, right? And it kind of varied within that range and never really got outside that range, but it was like all over the place within that range. So I didn't necessarily love that. Like, I did think the actions was pretty fast, but like the inner monologues were pretty kind of slow. So it was all over the place. Next, let's talk about diversity. There is a variety of skin colors in this particular book, although I did not notice that there were any Asians. I might be wrong, but there weren't any Asian equivalent. But there were a variety of skin colors. It does not have any impact on the culture or anything. Like, they're not from different cultures necessarily. It's just different skin colors, which is fine. There is a sapphic relationship, which is a little bit in the background, and I kind of really appreciate it, partially because like it just is. It's just allowed to be, which is nice. Um, then I think what was done best for representation is both Violet and Aster, who are the older girls and have been working at this brothel for about a year apiece. They have PTSD and they have to deal with it. And even in the middle, there is a fairly frank conversation about triggers. They don't call it that, but that is what it is. And they discuss it, and they're trying to work through their triggers. They're trying to work through this traumatic time of their life, and so that it doesn't cripple them as they are trying to make their escape. And I did think that it was pretty well done. Violet also has a drug addiction, which makes sense because they do give the girls a calming drug so that they are more pliable, which absolutely makes sense because like pliable girls are less likely to riot. And so Violet is addicted to this drug. One thing that I really appreciate is the reaction of the other girls. So Violet loses her drugs, and like the immediate reaction of the group is, we have to get her more. It wasn't just like and it wasn't because like they wanted her to be sharp, but they didn't want her to go through this horrific withdrawal that they knew was going to happen if she just quit cold turkey. And they like stopped everything and put their necks out to rob an apothecary to get her these drugs so she would not have to go through a horrific withdrawal. And like Violet is pretty, like, again, she's prickly. And part of that is because she is trying to wean herself off of this drug. And I kind of just appreciate that inclusion with this. And then lastly, let's talk about content warnings. The first is that there is sexual assault in this on page. There is no rape on page, but there is sexual assault. And there are all the trappings and understanding that these girls did not choose to be prostitutes, and so they are being raped. But it is not on page. And then, of course, there's the warning for the oppression of an entire people. That is pretty much what this book is about. Like I said before, it's really about Aster figuring out like how she's going to fight the system that is actively trying to oppress her. Now, for this reason, like, this isn't a story that if I had known it was more about Aster finding herself within this oppressive system rather than a group of girls like bonding over this journey together, I would still be interested in it, but I wouldn't have been as interested, if I'm being honest. It's just not something I gravitate towards. And between that and the understanding that I am very likely not the target audience of this book, apart from it being YA, I'm just not the target audience for this. I really struggle to give this a rating because I do think that there are some very serious issues with it. But I also recognize that like what it's saying may be much more meaningful to the target audience, of which I am not a part of. And so when that happens, I'm never sure of how to rate a book. And so for this one, on Goodreads, I did do my own personal rating, but I don't want to discourage anybody from reading it because it may be exactly what you need to read. But it was definitely not really for me, and I'm not entirely certain that I'm going to continue on with this series. But that is all I have. Like, let me know down below if you even heard of this book, because I haven't seen anybody talk about it. If you've read it, please come discuss it with me. But that is all I have. So until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.